The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
I understand some of you have lived an entire day already by 11 a.m. So I'm going to invite you to center yourself and take a deep breath with me. If you're feeling brave, put a hand on your heart. Let us pray. Holy One, may the gift of this day not be lost on us. The glory of our beating hearts, breath moving through our lungs, all of our intricate systems, the synapses firing inside our brains. What a strange and wondrous thing it is to be alive and human. For this we give thanks. We also need help, so much help. For the work that is before us, we ask for guidance. We pray for eyes to see a way through the parts that feel impossible. You have gifted us with all we need. This room is filled with everything we need. We bring experience and creativity, insight, education, so many opinions, resources, and humor. There is no lack here, only abundance. Give us the courage and imagination to approach the day through this lens. In your holy name we pray, amen.
Amen. The chaplain for today is Pastor Jody Hauge from Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will take the roll. Members, please answer the quorum call. Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor. Will the Chief Clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Carol.
Here you go.
Carol present.
Carol present. Pulowski. Pulowski.
Okay, you're up. Just say your name. Try it again.
Pulowski present.
Pulowski present.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 93rd session, 2024, 115th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Monday, May 13th, 2024.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House Files 5471 through 5474.
First reading House Files 5471 through 5474. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Long from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bill to be placed on the calendar for the day for Friday, May 17, 2024, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bill. House File Number 4746.
Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 4399, an act relating to human services. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate. Conference Committee report on Senate File Number 4399. The report is addressed to the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate, and Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 4399, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 3 of the 3 members on the part of the Senate and 3 of the 3 members on the part of the House. Fischer moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 4399 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fischer, on your motion to adopt the Conference Committee report. Please explain the report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, conference report on Senate File 4399 basically reflects most of the House language that we sent over. There were some minor changes that did occur. We reconciled minor differences regarding exempting state licensed facilities from local government rental licensing regulations. We modified the qualifications for designated coordinators and managers to better align with workforce needs. We incorporated feedback from providers and DHS on comprehensive assessment policy changes. We provided a solution to preserve the ability of the medium intensity rate for substance use disorder treatment, building off the work done in last year's Human Services Policy Bill. We added further clarification to ensure that peer recovery specialists cannot be classified or treated as independent contractors. We're aligning take-home dose qualifications for methadone and other DHS policy in the health bill. We also included provisions from the other body that addressed issues around modifying the qualification for positive support analysis, ensure the PCA and community first services and supports enhanced rate passed last year were incorporated this year, modifying waiver reimagined and informed choice stakeholder consultation. We provided a CADI, customized living waiver exemption for several locations in Hennepin County. We had modified assisted living director qualifications that came in, and we also required assisted living facilities to post a correction plan after a correction order. The only major change that we had from our bill is that the provision that we had to phase out 14C was not accepted by the Senate. We did have a robust discussion. I do appreciate the debate that that we had in our body here, where we all felt uncomfortable with it not having a floor at all. I mean, 7 cents an hour seems very, very disturbing, and we want to come back and continue to discuss those next year. I do want to thank all the advocates and our committee for doing the work. Particularly, I'd like to thank our conference committee people, Senator Hoffman, Representative Frederick, Representative Baker, Senator Mann, Senator Utke. Most importantly, the staff that was involved. We wanted to make sure to recognize the staff from the revisor's office who did all the work pulling together, Dean Tresses, Alex Willer, and along with our nonpartisan staff, Senate Counsel Liam Monahan and House Research Danelle Punelli, and then of course all the staff that took care of us, Senate Committee Administrator David Zak, Committee Administrator Nick Stumo-Langer, Senate Committee Legislative Assistant Cassie Shore, Committee Legislative Assistant Spencer Kroos, and Senate DFL Researcher Lemony Spiriti, and then House DFL Researcher Molly Pedersen, Senate GOP Researcher Bryce Hengst, and then House GOP Researcher Jonathan Carter. And with that, I would ask for approval.
The member from Candy Ojai, Representative Baker, to the motion to concur.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I will
Motion
also
to
support.
adopt, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will also support that motion or the adoption in front of us today, members. I want to say just for a moment here, this is where I thought we would have been doing a lot more of this 2 years ago, where we could literally try to work across the aisles and work together like I have been proud to do with Chair Fischer. Chair Fischer is a strong leader. He has always reached out to folks in his committee. He cares what folks think about, and I want to say thank you to my friend Peter Fischer. Representative Fischer, thank you for doing that. When our voices are heard, we can go along with you a lot better. We can make the oil and the gears work so much better on this kind of a thing. So for that, again, I encourage members to support this very collaborative bill. I also want to thank my friend Representative Frederick, who, again, we have been together on a lot of different issues surrounding mental health and substance use disorder and bringing up better guardrails that we didn't always agree on, but we always knew that we could work together on this kind of issue. And this needs to be how we do the rest of our last few hours here, members. Don't bring things forward that are going to be so hyper challenging to work through, and if you don't put us on conference committees, it doesn't work well. So let's take a moment and say thank you to those leaders that did this, and I want to do that, starting with the Speaker Hoffman. This was a good thing that we did. We've got to do more of this, and we should do this for the last 88 hours or whatever we have left here, members, but I do hope that our body will support this, and it'll be something that we'll be proud of, and it'll show us what the next 4 days will look like as well. So thank you for that, and I support this. Vote green.
See no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference committee report, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails, and the clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File Number 4399, as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Any discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the names of the members voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Pawlowski.
Pawlowski, aye.
Pawlowski, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 126 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the conference and its title agreed to.
Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 4579, an act relating to energy. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodern, Secretary of the Senate. Conference Committee report on Senate File Number 4579. The report is addressed to the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate, the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 4579, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 3 members on the part of the Senate and all 3 members on the part of the House. Hollins moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 4579 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. This Conference Committee report reflects extensive work with many stakeholders and support from legal aid, Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, and third-party billing companies. It places tenants in shared meter buildings in the same position and offers similar protections to the protections that tenants in directly metered buildings currently receive. It gives the Public Utilities Commission authority in shared metered building situations, and it is a good bill. I recommend its adoption.
Discussion. The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hollins, for your work on this, and thank you, Madam Speaker, for appointing me to my first conference committee. I also join in the motion to adopt the conference committee report, and I just want to to call out not only the good work of the legislators working on this issue, but the good work of Ron Elwood in particular from Legal Aid, as well as the folks from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, who both worked together genuinely in good faith on solving a problem that I think both of them want solved, and creating some legal certainty in an area where there wasn't a clear legal framework, and that was to the detriment of both good housing providers who want to be able to deal with folks fairly on this, as well as obviously the driving force behind this was the problems that it creates for a lot of folks and tenants in housing that does deal with shared metering situations. And so out of that problem came a bill that actually both Legal Aid and Minnesota Multi-Housing Association want us to pass in order to create certainty around this area. I think this is a good model for what we should be doing in these final days of this particular legislative session, where we're surrounded by a lot of noise and a lot of tension and a lot of potential for things to go sideways in a lot of different ways. This is actually the model, I think, of what we should be doing to try to work together to have real solutions to real problems that can bring people together. So thank you for your work on this, Representative Hollins. Thank you to all of the stakeholders who worked hard on this. And I also signed the conference committee report and urge members to support its adoption. Thank you.
All those in favor of the adoption of the conference committee report, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File Number 4579, as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Any discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the names of the members voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 125 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.
Message from the Senate,
Madam
Madam
Speaker.
Speaker. I hereby announce that the Senate has...
Representative Rarick, for what purpose do you rise? The clerk is in the middle of reporting a bill.
I know, Madam Speaker. I wanted to vote yes on that last bill.
I'm sorry, the board has closed.
Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 3567, an act relating to education. The message is signed Thomas S. Boddard, Secretary of the Senate. Conference Committee report on Senate File Number 3567. And the report is addressed to the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate, the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 3567, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 3 of the 3 members on the part of the Senate and 2 of the 3 members on the part of the House.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor, on the motion to adopt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, that is my motion. We do have an education policy bill that's returned now from conference committee. And I just want to highlight some of the things that did change in the report that's coming back to us after our discussions with our colleagues in the Senate. First of all, there is currently a modified version of the Senate's book ban prohibition that's included. This was a bill that was heard in our committee. It was voted out of committee and sent to judiciary for further work. Some of the work that we had wanted to do on that prohibition of banning books we were not able to accomplish in this session. So it's pretty much the version that was heard originally. Some further clarification of his work, and I do want to give credit to Representative Fischer for improving the bill that was originally sent over us from the Senate. There's also modified language from the Senate about American Indian mascots. We are requiring now that school districts with prohibited American Indian mascots to report to the legislature by February 14th, 2025, and again in the year 2026, with confirmation that they have removed the prohibited mascots from their websites and approved a new one. And there's some more information relating to that too. We've also added instruction by tribal, spiritual, and cultural advisors to the statute, allowing schools to grant excused absences for up to 3 hours each week for religious instruction. We're allowing smudging in public schools. We're requiring schools to consult with their local paraprofessional unions when determining what trainings to offer their paras. This was language that was originally carried in the finance bill that's moved over now to education policy. We're requiring Minnesota State High School League to provide eating disorder prevention education to coaches. We heard this bill again in our committee. We left it without requiring them now, but the Senate thought that it was so important that we should require the high school league to provide this education. And then finally, or another couple ones, we have new language that encourages schools to adopt a policy on parental notification when a student is removed from class from an unscheduled purpose, and requires school districts to consult with child abuse prevention experts in developing these policies. Now, this is and encourage school districts to do it. This is important work that we want to keep continuing, which we know that there have been tragic incidences in schools where adult figures of authority have taken advantage of students. And we want to continue that work to make sure that this cannot happen again in our schools. We want to encourage our districts to put in place any policies that would be able to prevent this. So this was a beginning of that work that's in this education policy bill, and I think that will be work that we continue on as a body to talk about these policies that would prevent abuse like this happening ever again to a child in our Minnesota schools. Also from the Senate, we are changing the name of the accountability system. It had been called World's Best Workforce. The new name will be Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness. So I guess we say CACRA, unless somebody comes up with a better way of arranging those letters. There are some of the provisions that we're not able to get across the finish line through the Senate. There are some changes to the PSEO language. Representative Erdahl's amendment about a model policy for school districts for dissemination of private sexual images was not a policy that was adopted from the conference committee. I tried somewhat. Then also, in terms of, one thing we had a lot of discussion on is the publications, how school districts use publications in their local newspapers, and those newspapers that have folded and school districts are not left with that means. It turns out that Litchfield and Hutchinson now have local publications that they can continue, so what was originally in that amendment was dropped out because it was no longer a need for those particular districts. So we kept up with current events with our language in our bill. So other changes, and this was something that was discussed thoroughly in committee and then was also discussed on the floor, was the dates for reporting statewide assessments deadlines. And this was about how MDE consolidates the reporting, and then when they have to report that on a statewide level. So originally in the bill, both in the House and the Senate, September 1st was or it had been December 1st, it was moved to December. We took and had a long discussion with MDE about the earliest that they can report these things, because it is important to families to get this consolidated information about school districts. So we worked out a compromise where that date has been moved up again. And there's just certain exceptions where that will be reported later. So this sounds like very technical, in the weeds, but it does have an impact. And I can say that it does show the good work of committees and floor debate, that we kept raising this as an issue that people cared about, and it was a change that we did make in the final conference committee bill. Then also a change, but not really of the work that we've done as a body. The language from early childhood that was just policy was moved into this education policy bill, so that you'll see this here. We had passed it off the floor in a different bill originally. And then also the policy provisions related to the READ Act is now in the education policy bill. And again, this would before had been carried in education finance. It was moved over just the policy part into education policy. So education policy does talk about the READ Act and literacy in schools, which is a change which I'm kind of glad to see that we have in our bill right now. So those are some of the highlights, folks. And I hope that we can pass this on and get it to the governor.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to not adopt the conference committee
Representative
report.
Bennett moves to
request a roll
refuse
call.
to adopt the conference committee report, requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first of all, I just want to thank Representative Chair Pryor and all the conference committee members, including those on the Senate side. I think the process was great. It was very transparent. I felt I was kept in the loop, and I appreciate that very much. And there are some excellent components in this conference committee report. The MCA delaying of those MCA reports was fixed. That's important to many people, including parents and community members. The mascot change compromise delay there, I think, is important as well. And I could go on about some others, but there are three main concerns that I have with this report that I believe really it needs to be sent back because of that. One of them is just this focus on prohibiting book banning. Okay, this is an issue that you see it all over social media by the governor and so on. And honestly, members, this is an obfuscation of the real matter in our schools. And that is that for children who can't read, every book is banned. And at this point, as you've heard over and over on this floor and in committee, we have less than half of our Minnesota students who can read at grade level. It's less for math and less for science. This is concerning. So we're sitting here focusing on this book ban issue, which is quite rare in Minnesota, when we have kids who can't read any book. That's not appropriate. That is not right. 500,000 kids in this state cannot read at grade level right now. For those kids, every book is banned. Another issue I have here is with the READ Act, which I support the underlying drive of this READ Act. I think it's important, the science of reading and so on. But it was overregulated and underfunded in my mind, but it's at least a start. But in this committee report, we have actually rolled back our READ Act. We're focusing more now on radical ideology that would actually ban curriculum on what, and instead we should be focusing on what our children can do and get them up to grade level in reading. So that concerns me greatly. I know some of other members are going to speak to that as well. And then the last fact, we have mandates. Last session, we had 65 new mandates. Our districts talked about them a lot in our committees, called it torpedoes. We had a salvo of mandates last session, and now we've added more mandates this session. That's unacceptable. Our schools are trying to play catch up with the mandates from last session. How can we expect them to take more on? We have a twin crisis right now in literacy and in our student attendance. This report, in my mind, needs to focus on those things strongly, and it doesn't. So, Madam Speaker, again, I just move not to adopt this, and I again thank Chair Pryor and conference committee members. It was a good process, but in the outcome, the content is just not acceptable in my mind. Thank you.
The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I want to just thank Chair Pryor for her work throughout our committee work, but also just her time serving here in the legislature. I think it's important to recognize her work and representing her community. Representative Bennett talked about some of the good components of this bill, and there are some pieces that are helpful. I really appreciate, we had robust conversations about the MCA reporting timelines and just how that, frankly, was illogical. So I appreciate that feedback was taken and we corrected that issue. The publications for newspapers, that has a significant impact on my local communities that I represent, so that will be helpful. But as I was walking up to the chamber today, I ran into a teacher and a football coach. So he introduced himself. I won't say where he was from, just to not out him too much. But he was walking with his group of kids, and we just had a conversation about how are things going at your school. And basically, to sum it up, what he talked about was, God, I thought we were going to get all this money, but we just got hammered with mandates. And I think that's the piece. You know, we saw it in the Reformer article, and it was interesting. I had a constituent reach out and was pushing back on some of my conversation, and I showed him the Reformer article right after session, and it was talking about how historic investments in schools. And then I sent him the Reformer article just before we started in February, and how the narrative was very, very different. And I think the bottom line is, whether it be in the Reformer article talking about the 65 mandates, whether it be me talking to an educator in the stairwell here at the Capitol, the mandates, schools are still trying to get unburied from these mandates of last session, the 65 mandates. Not my number, the Reformers' number. So we should be, and that's why I would support the motion to re-refer, we should be going back and looking at how we can peel back some of those. We didn't do that this session, and that's unfortunate. We missed an opportunity to really help our schools. We missed an opportunity to say, you know what? Maybe what we wanted to do last session wasn't the right thing to do. We missed an opportunity to show some humility and say, let's go back and fix that. But instead, we are growing the Department of Education, and while school districts across the state are cutting their budgets. I mean, I think we just need to let that sink in. We're growing the department, and school districts are cutting their budget. We have a crisis of literacy. We have to get this right. And we talked extensively about how we can't bow down to people that frankly don't want to change and do hard work. We need to push back against that, and we've regressed, and I'm disappointed in that. Student attendance, we'll talk about that in the finance bill, but we have got to, and I think there's some consensus, I know there's consensus across the board to be able to address student attendance. And this whole idea of book banning is extremely frustrating. When you look at data, since Governor Walz has taken office, reading scores are down 16%. And the simple fact is, if a kid can't read every single book, when they go to the library, whether there's a licensed librarian in there or not, that kid can't read that book. So every book is banned to a kid that can't read. I would encourage, let's re-refer this and let's get this right, because if we don't, our schools are going to have to implement our poor decisions.
The member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And I would also encourage us to refuse to adopt this conference committee report and send it back. This needs some more work. You've heard it from my colleagues, and you're going to hear it again, probably over and over and over again. There are simply things in here that are taking us backwards instead of forward. And of course, my whole career, I have been focusing on literacy. That's what I've been trained in. It's what I've been, my whole studies have been. And I know the fight that we had to get our reading instruction changed. And while I couldn't support the original bill because we can't somehow use the word science of reading, I understand the fight that was there to move this issue to the front. And to know that now we are going to give $1 million, I know this is a policy bill, but that we're giving this money to a third party to look for culturally responsive or culturally destructive material even after it was approved, we are superseding whether it works to making sure that it's not culturally destructive. This is a step backwards, members. A good teacher, and we know all of the good teachers, they have worked so hard. An effective teacher will take any material and make it relevant to their students. And I'm all for making sure there's mirrors and windows and all those things. But you cannot compromise on making something effective. Explicit instruction. And it looks as if you read the language, and which FYI, 65 plus mandates, and we're supposed to be having a supplemental, this is a non-budget year, and we're supposed to kind of go through and look at some of the policies and fix it. We have this giant bill, ladies and gentlemen. We should be going back and repealing, and yet we have this giant thing. Page 64, if you can believe it, page 64, upon approval of the evidence-based interventions. So let me translate, meaning it works, right? Evidence-based, that's what we want it to be. I mean, it should say science of reading. But according to this, it's evidence-based models. The department must ensure the models are reviewed by a contracted third party for culturally responsive guidance and materials. And if they're not, you have to find something else. Sorry, it works. Sorry, it's actually doing what we wanted to do with the science of reading, but it's culturally destructive. So try again. And then, what's more egregious, members, if you look on page 65, it says that we have ongoing review of the literacy materials and that they can partner with one or more of the institution of higher education to conduct independent and objective reviews. I don't know how independent and objective someone can be when they already believe the science of reading is racist, and they have made that explicitly clear. When the higher education institutions have made that explicitly clear, why are we partnering with them to say, oh, one or more of the institutions of higher education can conduct an independent objective review? They are not objective on this. They already have a preset idea, and they have told us that already. They have told us that. And so this is not a good provision. This is moving us backwards. If our goal was saying, listen, our reading instruction legislation that was adopted back in the early 2000s, it wasn't enough to really push forward explicit and instruction. If it wasn't doing enough, when we're going to change that, and we took a step forward, and we took a step in the right direction, but it still, as we have said, it is not enough to prevent some bad actors from continuing the failed policies that are allowing our children to basically be illiterate. Not because of our teachers, because our teachers are learning the things that they're being taught in the higher education. This needs to be going right back to our higher education institutes and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing to make sure that our teachers know how to teach reading? Because right now, as you've heard so many times, half of our students can't read at grade level. It's unacceptable. I saw several people at the Literacy Day at the Capitol. Today a reader, tomorrow a leader. How about we do some leading in this chamber and stand up for the science of reading and actually prioritize good instruction? We are seeing that this READ Act was overregulated and underfunded. The money didn't go to our classroom, and the poor attempt that we're trying to quickly fix this is actually a step backwards. This is not a good addition to this bill, members, and it should be going back. We need to refuse to adopt so that we can send this back to conference. It does not hold our teacher preparation programs accountable, and those who actually oppose the science of reading still are there trying to offer CEUs to our teachers for reading instruction, come and take our course. We don't actually believe in the science of reading, but go ahead and do this. It will count for your reading CEUs. That should have been addressed right here in this piece of legislation, and it is not. This denied good teachers the skills they needed and robbed them of the tuition that they wasted on failed instruction from our higher institute. This should have been addressed in this piece of legislation. It is not. You have heard me over and over talk about how every child, when we talk about when every child can't read, when any child can't read, that every book is banned. You've heard that over and over again. I've said it in conference, I've said it in committee, I've said it on this floor. I don't know how many times we have to say it. When a child can't read, every book is banned. This is a distraction. Minnesota, this is a distraction. The majority party wants you to focus on this because they don't want you to focus on the fact that their failed policies are not teaching children how to read.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Jordan, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise to a point of order under Mason's 124. Personalities and motives are not permitted in debate. Saying Democrats want this is putting motives into the debate, and I ask you to rule on this.
I would ask members to please not assign motives to other people other than themselves. Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the facts are actually there, and I will not impugn any motives, but you've heard it lots and lots of times. Let's just look at statistics, ladies and gentlemen. Reading proficiency is down 16% since 2019. This isn't the pandemic. This is when Governor Walz took office. Math proficiency is down 17%. Science proficiency down 23%. Graduate rates are stagnant. But instead of focusing on how we can actually focus on the science of reading, we're focusing on book banning. This is a distraction, ladies and gentlemen. This is a distraction. You should be focusing on that every book is banned for a child that doesn't know how to read. That's what you'd be focusing on. Don't be swayed. Don't be fooled that we're actually getting something done. Focus on the fact that our children don't know how to read. That's what this legislation should have done, and it doesn't. The last thing that I want to talk about, and you've already heard it so many times from colleagues on this side of the aisle, is that there are mandates upon mandates upon mandates upon mandates. Received a letter, and it looks like it's gone to everyone on the Education Committee, so hopefully you took the time to read it. Too much of the new money was earmarked too precisely, and as I'm seeing, we are not getting enough of it in our small rural districts compared to metro areas. The funding we received is targeting the wrong areas and not hitting the classroom. Our small district is preparing to spend $133,000 on unemployment costs. That takes general dollars away from our classrooms into pockets of employees who are not working. High school requirements set by legislature are shaping high school schedules. This limits opportunities to students. We need to stop creating legislation from the extreme cases that just get your attention. It's ridiculous that we do that. Education Minnesota should not be the driver of legislation either. Their interests are not always in line with the teachers across the state, and I hear that often from our staff. I would strongly encourage spending more time listening to local board members, and I worry that in the last 2 years, St. Paul have created an unprecedented amount of policy that governs our schools. Why do we even need local school boards if St. Paul is just going to take over the policy role? A lot of damage was done last year, and I'm worried that more will be done this year. Maybe we should listen to the teachers that are actually doing the job, school board members that are actually doing the job, representing the teachers and the students who are there, instead of holding fast to some ideology that isn't working in our classrooms. Members, vote green with me to refuse to adopt, because we cannot pass this legislation as it stands today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the conferees on the Education Policy Committee, Conference Committee. And I have a strong need here. That's why I rose to speak to this bill. I represent Anoka Hennepin, the largest school district in the state. And going to their pre-legislative meeting that they have for legislators, they only had 3 priorities this year. But you know what one of those was? To address this out-of-control disciplinary policy, where a second grader bloodies another second grader and has no consequences. That little second grader is running the classroom. We have a problem with teachers quitting early because they just can't take it anymore. Because we policymakers have decided that we're going to tell them how to run their classroom and what works best for them. That's no way to operate a classroom. To Representative Bennett and Mueller, you know, one of the reasons that our kids can't read is because there's so much distraction going on in the classroom that they keep getting interrupted by out-of-control children that the teacher can't do anything about. Is it any wonder that they're not learning? I'd be really interested to know when we pass that disciplinary problem for no expulsions and no suspensions for these kids. I think it was during COVID. But I would love to see if it corresponds with the decline over the years in test scores. I'm going to guess that it does. Members, that's no way to run a classroom. We're not doing those kids any favors if they're not being held accountable for their out-of-control actions. That's only going to escalate as they get older. And I know I'm going to guess, but everybody sitting in this chamber today has heard about this issue from their schools. Or maybe from a parent whose kid has been the victim of an out-of-control student in the classroom. But their kid has to go back to that same classroom with that same, naughty student. Nobody's learning. In fact, I had a teacher say, yeah, we have to if there's one child having a temper tantrum or a meltdown or throwing chairs or whatever, we have to pick up all the other students and walk them out of the classroom while Paris sat in the classroom with the out-of-control student. It's wrong. And the conference committee should have addressed this issue. There's no excuse for not addressing it. If you want to raise test scores, start here. Please vote to refuse to adopt this conference committee report. Send them back to the drawing board and do something about this disciplinary policy problem.
The member from Washington, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to piggyback on what Representative Scott just talked about. And actually, this provision was adopted last year. So in 6 months since this happened, we've had incredible problems all across our school districts. I've heard this same legislative breakfast, the Stillwater Area School District, that is their #1 problem. And it's causing teachers to leave. It's causing pain and issues for the superintendents, for the principals. It's all about these kids that no longer can be disciplined, and they're harming every other kid. We have had a lot of kids disenroll out of the schools, either go homeschooling or private schools because of this issue. And it's just wrong. So when our schools are talking about lowering or that they're getting less and less students, and because of it, they are asking for more and more dollars to help fund things, but the problem is actually things that were created by this legislature. I would think that in the second year of the biennium that the policy bill would be taking a look at, hey, what was passed last year, what's working, what's not working, and put some, try to do what we can to help the things that are working and puts maybe some dollars behind them, maybe some more policies, but to get rid of the policies that are failing. And the 65 mandates, of one of which is this exclusionary discipline mandate, have caused huge problems for our schools. I know this isn't the finance bill, but I do want to just mention these 65 mandates also had a huge effect on funding. We've seen districts, class sizes are getting bigger across the state. It should have been the opposite. We should have taken the money that we put into education and actually lowered class sizes, but that's not what's happened. What's happened is we have foisted mandates on districts, we have foisted policies on districts that make absolutely no sense, and things that are not helping our kids. In fact, they're harming our kids. The book banning is another example. This is another, something after a problem that doesn't really exist. Okay, so that's going to be a provision. That's what we're going to focus on when half of our kids can't read, when we've got disciplinary problems all up and down, when we have huge numbers of kids that aren't even attending school, and we're going to focus on things like that? That makes no sense, members. So I also, my hope, I had hoped that we would take our time and fix things, do things for our schools that are going to help educate our kids, that are going to help make teaching fun again and a wonderful career again, rather than making our teachers be essentially the disciplinarians, which they can't do, right, within the schools. And that's what's happened. So I also I encourage us to refuse to adopt, to refer this back to conference, and to actually fix education, because we are going to lose another year, a whole nother year. We've known about these issues and the reading issues for years. And last year we did very little besides pass the READ Act to help. This year we're doing nothing to help. And once we're going to have a whole another generation of kids that are going to not do well in school, that aren't going to read, that aren't going to have their math. And it's a shame, because Minnesota used to be the leader, the absolute leader in education. And that was something we were all very proud of forever. And we aren't anymore. And we aren't. And it's because of policies that have been passed by this legislature over the last, several years that are more focused with things that harm the kids rather than things that help the kids. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion to refuse to adopt, and for the comments you made in particular about this so-called book banning provision. It's really, like you said, it's a distraction from the bigger problems that our state faces in a lot of ways. And it's odd that it ended up in this conference committee report, given the fact that nothing like this passed out of the House at all. It just snuck in, I guess, through the Senate. But it's a distraction. It's a symbol. It says to a bunch of Minnesota parents in particular that your views aren't welcome. This is interesting coming from the one Minnesota administration. But it's a distraction from the, like Representative Bennett said, like Representative Bakeberg said, from the work that needs to be done to actually help make sure that everyone can read. Because to a student who can't read, every book is banned, like you said, Representative Bennett. That is absolutely correct. And reading proficiency since 2019 is down 16%. Over half of the kids in Minnesota, over half of the students in Minnesota can't read at grade level. That is what the administration should be focused on. That is what this bill should be focused on. I did also want to talk about how this is a distraction, though, from the work that needs to be done to restore a First Amendment culture in this state. I've heard this provision talked about as if it's some advancement of the First Amendment by telling certain parents that what you think about books that are in your school libraries, that you're wrong, that's somehow advancing the First Amendment. Well, we should be doing a lot of other work to advance the First Amendment in this chamber. And the good news is, in the last week, we just showed that some of that work is possible. Some of you may not know this, but we received word just a few minutes ago that House File 4109 was signed by the governor. That was passed off of this floor, I guess 8 days ago now. Movement in the right direction, finally, on a big First Amendment problem that was created last year by efforts to use the Human Rights Act to weaponize discrimination claims against faith communities and churches in particular. So we can do that work. We could have, in this education bill, we could have turned around the discrimination that was passed against faith-based colleges in the PSEO program. We could do something as a legislature about the surveillance database that's housed at the Department of Human Rights to track speech that the administration doesn't like. We could do something about the bills that were passed last year, signed by the governor, that banned political speech by certain speakers, corporations, while allowing it for other speakers. We could do something about the legislation that was passed last year that the governor has said recently, you go to jail if you're an employer and you give a certain kind of have a certain kind of captive meeting. The governor said recently that people are going to go to jail if they violate that law. We could do something about advancing First Amendment rights by fixing that problem. But instead, we're pretending to advance the First Amendment by doing this fake ban on book bans. Members, this is a distraction. This is a distraction from the real distortions and damage that was done to the First Amendment last year that we should be working on fixing this year. But instead, what we're doing is we're telling certain Minnesota parents that we don't care if your kids
Point
can't
of order,
read.
Madam Speaker.
Representative Jordan, please state your point of order.
Thank you. Under Masons 124, personalities and questioning motives are not permitted in debate. Saying that this is what we're doing and this is what we want to tell parents is bringing motives into debate.
Members, just please be careful about the words that you choose. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and absolutely I'm being very careful in the words that I'm choosing. The message that we are sending to certain Minnesotans today is that you're not welcome, that your views aren't welcome in one Minnesota. And instead of trying to make this a state that embraces a plurality of views, and instead of trying to make this a state in which all speech is allowed and not prohibited by the state of Minnesota, we're going down this road. It's unfortunate. We should get rid of this. We should do a lot of other work to advance First Amendment values, but we certainly should send this conference committee report back to conference committee. So thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion. I urge member support.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I truly am sincere when I say I was not intending to speak on this bill, conference committee report, but multiple times you've raised the issue around the book banning prohibition. So let me tell you what it actually does. What it does is it prohibits banning, removing, or otherwise restricting access to an otherwise age-appropriate book or other material from a school library based solely on the viewpoint, content, message, idea, or opinion conveyed. So the First Amendment protections you're talking about are absolutely protected. That's for all Minnesotans. We keep talking about one Minnesota. We want to make sure everyone's First Amendment views are protected. That's what this bill does. It requires folks to create a policy to do that, and that is what the bill does. That is great for all of Minnesota. We should want to allow the opportunity for materials to be present that will broaden the perspectives and the horizons of our kids. And I keep hearing the position taken that, well, kids can't read, so books are banned. Well, we're working on making sure that our kids can read. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're also making sure that we ensure that materials and books are available to broaden their horizons, which is important for our position as a global. We're creating global students to participate in this global economy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. Yes, I wanted to speak and thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion to refuse to adopt this. With education, and this really should be our #1 priority as Minnesotans, for our children, for our future, and this is not acceptable, members. What is happening in our education system simply is not acceptable, nor should it be acceptable to any member in this chamber. The last 2 years have been incredibly detrimental to our schools. And yet, this continues to fall on tone-deaf ears. We have our school systems, our superintendents, our school boards begging for relief, begging the majority party to listen. And I just believe this is actually quite, overwhelming to understand where the disconnect is coming. We absolutely need to send this policy back, this bill back to the committee. We need to give schools relief from the mandates. Members, this is completely irresponsible. Our schools cannot continue down this path. Members, I know you have schools over there that are hurting financially. I hear from them. I'm on the Education Finance Committee. I have taken meetings with them in my office because people from the majority party are not taking those meetings. So on the policies, we need to give relief on the mandates. And I just want to read real quick. In my district, in my district, Red Wing Schools, they're looking at a $2 million deficit. $2 million. Sorry, it's very difficult for me to read at my age. So this is after Red Wing Schools just had a referendum in 2022. From the school board meeting, I just want people of Red Wing to know that the initial referendum promises were made and kept. 2022 referendum, folks. Promises were made and kept. The superintendent did their job, the school board did their job. You know who did not do the job? Right here in this body. We put mandates over mandates on our schools, 65 new mandates. They're unfunded. They don't have the money. From the Red Wing paper, whoops, I'm really having trouble. This is a quote. It hurts so much to have these conversations, and I want our community to know that none of this is taken lightly. They are looking at how they're going to make cuts. Byron School, which is not in my district, but is just in southeast Minnesota. Here's the headline from Byron School. Byron Public Schools approve list of reductions as part of a multi-year budget cut process. $2 million in budget cuts required. Members, how did that happen after a record amount of new funding going to our schools? $2.2 billion. Remember the headlines? $2.2 billion. Record funding for our schools. You remember this. And now this year, 1 year later, you're going to pass this with giving no relief when nearly every district is suffering financially? Our schools need relief. Now, last time I spoke on this bill, I asked the majority party, I challenged them, I think very nicely and respectfully, for one person to tell me that their school was satisfied or happy with what happened in the 2023 session. I asked one person to stand. Well, that person who did is no longer in the chamber, but I was going to ask Representative Hicks today if she was aware of the school board meeting that just happened on Monday. So on this floor, she said her school was happy with what happened in 2023. Rochester Schools, $19.4 million deficit. $19.4 million deficit in Rochester schools, and that's after a $10 million gift from Mayo. Minnesota, the majority party has absolutely left education. This is going back to the local taxpayer, and it is quite disgusting. The estimated referendum in Rochester will increase costs $362 per household. Rochester schools. Madam Speaker, may I ask Representative Smith to yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Smith, have you talked to people in the Rochester school districts? Are they prepared for a referendum that is going to increase their property taxes on average $60 per month? And is this something that the Rochester community is prepared to take on?
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to speak for my whole community. Obviously, that referendum will come out, and they will speak on that themselves if they want to do that or not to do that. We are in communication with our school board. A lot of the financial hardships we're in is not because of the last even 5 years. It actually is something that happened a decade ago that we are still recovering from, and that's why this referendum is being discussed. So I'll leave it there.
Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Smith. You know what? Minnesotans aren't buying it. They're not buying it. You can keep on saying these political talking points all day long. $19 billion surplus, $2.2 billion increase to our schools. They're not buying it. The superintendents are not buying it. The teachers are not buying it. The students are not buying it. $19 billion surplus, and you're going to try to tell us that we could not fund the schools?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Long, please state your point of order.
We are pretty far away from the refusal to adopt, so Mason's 101, confining your remarks to the subject of debate.
Members, please articulate reasons that a person should vote either for or against the motion to refuse to adopt. Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Long, because I would like to reiterate everything I'm talking about is absolutely why I am supporting Representative Bennett's motion to refuse to adopt, and that is because our schools are just incredibly hurting. You only need to do a simple Google search to see the schools that are looking to have to do new funding for referendums. They are looking at huge budget cuts. And the majority party is tone deaf. The majority party is absolutely not listening. Right now, we could have, with 4 days left of this legislative session, we could absolutely send this report back to the committee, take these burdens off of our schools, and give them a great gift so that that doesn't need to go back to the local taxpayers and be the burden of the taxpayers. Thank you, members. Please vote green. Listen now, green is in support of your schools. Green is in support of sending this back and taking the mandates away so that we can allow our schools to function locally. Thank you.
The member from Cass, Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I would like to start off by just saying I am happy to hear that the MCA release date did not get pushed back to December, and it is currently staying at September 1st. But I think that that's something that we need to look to in the future to make even earlier. As much time possible. The earlier our school districts have this information, the earlier our school boards have this information, the earlier parents have this information, the better opportunity for course correction for our students. The 1-year extension on the mascot change deadline, that's just a Band-Aid. That gives them 1 more year, but that doesn't provide any funding. And they're telling us we don't have the money to do this. Another mandate, another unfunded mandate that our schools are now suffering because of. We could have done better there. Book banning. It's been said several times, but it needs to be said several more. To a child that can't read, every book is banned. We are in a crisis in Minnesota. Since 2019, reading proficiency is down 16%. Math proficiency is down 17%. Science proficiency is down 23%. We're not fixing that. As a matter of fact, the READ Act, which was passed last year, we're now rolling it back. We're playing yo-yo with our schools. They can't take this anymore, you guys. I hear from them all the time. I actually was texting with one of my superintendents yesterday. They can't take this anymore. We could have done better. This conference committee report could have been better. Local control, we continue to chip away and chip away and chip away at local control. Placing power at the department, which, by the way, grew by 21% last year. Placing power at the department does not help our students. Our school boards, our educators, and our parents know their students best. We need to give them the control. We need to give them the ability to meet individual needs within their schools. A one-size-fits-all, that doesn't work. This conference committee report could have been much, much better. Thank you, Representative Bennett, for your motion to not adopt this. We need to focus more on local control. We need to help our students. We need to empower our parents. Empowering parents empowers our students. Members, please vote green on Representative Bennett's motion. Thank you.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. I rise in support of Representative Bennett's motion to refuse to adopt this conference committee report. The conference committee report is a little bit schizophrenic. There's provisions in here that directly contradict one another. On the one hand, we're saying that we're going to prohibit book banning, which in and of itself is a complete and utter misnomer. What we're prohibiting with this bill is the curation of catalogs and curriculum for children, which is absurd on its face because you literally can't have a library or a school without the curation of content. We do not teach every book published, nor do we put it on the shelves of every library. We have to pick and choose. This belongs, this does not. This serves an academic purpose, this does not. This is appropriate, age appropriate, culturally appropriate, and I know you care about that because the provision that this is in conflict with is where we're revising the READ Act to require folks to go back through curriculum and learning materials to assess whether or not they are culturally and linguistically responsive. And what happens if we determine that they're not? Well, then MDE is going to ban them. Weird. Definitely schizophrenic. So in the same bill, we're prohibiting book banning and providing for book banning. And the effect of that is going to be that a select few people who are on an approved list of who gets to make this decision are going to be doing the effective banning, if you insist upon calling it that, which you shouldn't, it's curation. But only a select group of people are going to be able to curate what is placed in front of our kids. And it's not going to be our communities. And that's a problem. By my read of this, you're opening up our school districts, our MDE, ourselves, to potential litigation as a result of explicitly putting our thumbs on the scale of who gets to determine what is and is not culturally appropriate. It's a bad position for us to be in. It's sloppy legislation. It should be fixed before it's signed by the governor, and that is why we should vote green to refuse to adopt this Conference Committee report. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And opportunities. That's what education's about. A great education provides the children of our communities and our state opportunities in life. A key priority in education must be reading. We thought we were making some progress, and many of us have already talked about how this is giving us doubts, sort of the yo-yo pulling back. But as Representative Hudson touched on, giving veto power over the effective, proven techniques that can be thrown out because of an opinion from an entity that's very related to what we're seeing across this nation on higher ed campuses, where the appropriate people get to choose which groups should be pushed and promoted. And if you're not one of those groups, even in Minnesota, we have Minnesota students scared to go on campus, to go to class, because they aren't the appropriate group. That is very disappointing, and effectively is banning people. So that's saying the majority can decide who matters. And that's been front and center in higher ed. And we have been trying here to focus on effective, proven reading techniques and materials, because we feel reading is a top priority of education. The other thing that a missed opportunity, there have been years of efforts to try and state that sexually explicit and pornographic materials should not be allowed in our schools. And that's being called a ban. I thought that was just being smart, because we need to let children be children and schools be focused on education. And it's not just some of us on the floor. You go across the communities, there are parents extremely upset. And successful school districts, they pair with, they partner with, they have the parents and the community involved. And sound bites seem to be the priority, as opposed to effectively in the conference committee report trying to address and improve problems. And not one of us on this side isn't ready to stand up and talk about reading. And frankly, we should be talking until we actually can pass bills that are going to help that, instead of giving and actually paying for entities to have veto rights over what works. Schools in my area, and I have people in my district that are in the Rochester School District. I have people in the Rochester School District, not in my district, calling and talking to me. And the problems they're seeing aren't from 10 years ago, as was mentioned earlier on the floor. Although some of them probably started back some years ago. The problems are when the state of Minnesota takes away the rights of the people in the district, those school boards those parents, teachers, and community to do what is best for their students. I thought, and it might be in that book that some of you are reading right now, I thought that we cared about the individual, the differences, the diversity. And if we do, then we are for allowing the options and control be with the people that just don't, it's not the name, they know the faces, they know the community, the families, they know what makes that kindergartner smile and enjoy school. And they know what you can do to keep the attention and there are so many things that should be local, but yet it's mandate after mandate, year after year, piling on. And if you're trying to fix those few districts that are broken and have been broken for decades, have been denying quality education for decades, then address those schools specifically. Don't say we're going to change everyone to fix the problem, because what you've done, and it was put forward by another member, schools in my area are having multi-million-dollar deficits caused by what has been done in the past several years on this House floor. We're talking right now about education, but those shortcomings are hitting from the mandates that are saying, we hired you for 9 months. You knew you were going to work 9 months, but now we're going to change it so, no, you're going to be considered unemployed after, in between the school year, and you're going to increase the costs to the schools. And that might not be bad if you're a school getting 30, 40% better than the state average. But the districts around me and my area with exceeding the state average in reading at grade level, math at grade level, science at grade level, graduation rates exceeding. It's very common to have schools in my area with 100% graduation. But now you're forcing them into statutory operating debt. You've pushed them to the point of where they can no longer provide the quality education to their kids. And it's not their fault. So I guess the books you're reading now are much more interesting than facing the facts and the reality that this conference committee report actually makes it worse for our schools, for our kids, our teachers, and our communities. And vote green or just continue reading the books and giggling. And I know that that's probably not appropriate, but the last week of the legislature, it is frustrating, months and months, working to be heard, to get things in, and I guess being ignored.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise to encourage everyone to support the motion to refuse to adopt, and it's for a simple. There's a couple of reasons, and I'm not gonna go long. If nothing else, just to end the frustration that we go through here on these conference committee reports. We had two examples this morning, Madam Speaker, of conference committee reports that Everyone played a part, and you appointed great conference committees, and there was push and pull, there was back and forth, and they came out, and there was agreement on these things. And this side, your side, everybody in this room, I think, believes in the importance of education. It's probably the most important thing that we do. But if we can't agree here that we need to listen to teachers, that we need to focus on mental health. And there's some of these things in this bill, but honestly, members, if this bill goes back and doesn't pass, it won't matter. Because there's not one thing in this bill that I can see that actually will work to improve academic outcomes. It's all based on instead of focusing on the purpose of education and on that excellence that we're trying to find, members, this is all about provision. That's up to school districts. Let them do their thing. We need to get back to the point where this body focuses on the purpose of education and allows school districts and teachers and parents to focus on the provision of that education and hold them accountable. Members, support the motion to refuse to adopt. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is an interesting discussion, and the bottom line, and frankly, to what Representative Nadeau was saying, is this is what 120 pages-ish, 20-page bill-ish that just doesn't solve problems. I like to say that there's a lot of things that we do to make adults feel better that don't actually do a darn thing to help kids. And this bill is an excellent example of that. We've been talking a lot about the science of reading, and actually, I wish we were talking more about the science of reading. We've been talking a lot about the problem of illiteracy among our children. And all of my children were homeschooled when they were young. And I was a mom who was not real interested in things like birthday parties for 4-year-olds. Like, I really struggled with those kinds of celebrations. But it was a very big deal in our house when a kid learned how to read. It was a very, very big deal. And in fact, when kids are little and they're learning, there comes a point when things just start to click, right? And it's a different age for everyone. I tell you what, one of my kids was reading Lord of the Rings at 7 years old. We read it at about the same time, and he understood it better than I did. It was amazing to me. I knew that kid was special in that way. I have another kid who really didn't pick up on reading till she was probably 8 and really just kind of struggled with it. But our rule in our house was, regardless of when that age came, I stopped everything else. For a month or whatever it took, all we did was read. That's all we focused on. And I'm very pleased to say that I have 5 very proficient readers. But it was a focus for us. We cared about it, and we knew that literacy, knowing how to read, that is the path to learning. I knew that if my kids could read proficiently, the sky's the limit. They can learn anything they need to learn. So while we didn't have birthday parties and things, as soon as they became a proficient reader, and we had a specific book that we got through at that point, and if they could get through that book, we had a reading party. And this was a big deal reading party. Like, every mom's nightmare, like Chuck E. Cheese, whatever the kids wanted was what we did for that reading party. Because learning how to read was the most fundamental thing that a kid needs to learn. That's it. And so we've got this distraction. This conversation about book banning is a distraction. Because it's been said before, but every single book is banned to a child who does not know how to read. Every book is banned to a kid who can't read. Now, I think it's also interesting, and I think it's important that we note that during the Walz administration, reading proficiency has dropped 16%. 16%. It has actually declined in that time. Not to mention math declining 17% and science declining 23%. And yet, graduation rates remain constant. We are graduating kids in this state who cannot function. They might be able to get by, right? Without math proficiency, science, they might be able to get by. Those kids are not getting by without reading proficiency. But we're graduating them anyway. We should absolutely refuse to adopt this report, send it back, and actually do something to help kids. Instead of making adults feel better, like, hey, we did something. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. There is nothing in this bill that is actually going to help a child. And Representative Anderson addressed the fact that families are choosing to forego public school at this point. They are withdrawing their kids from public school. It happened in droves during the pandemic when we kept kids away from the learning environment. But families have not gone back. They figured out that public school is failing them, and so they have not gone back. Families are turning to homeschooling or private school or charter schools. But Democrats have an answer for that too, don't they? We'll show them. Let's go after not everybody. Let's not make sure that everyone is following the same policies and procedures. Let's just go after the charter schools. Those evil charter schools that are dipping into our private school mafia. Excuse me, our public school mafia. We'd hate to have any school that might dip into what we've got going on. And so we're going to say, for you charter schools, we're going to reduce your aid if you don't follow all the rules exactly. Now, I'm a rule follower. We should follow all the rules exactly. But you know what we should do? We should apply this to all the schools equally. We're just going to go after the charter schools. Forget the fact that the Minneapolis school district a few years ago was spending millions of dollars on credit cards. They weren't following procurement policy, but Democrats didn't go after them, did they? Nope, we're just going to go after charter schools. And it's because charter schools, home schools, private schools, they eat into our business as public schools. They eat into our business. So we're going to go after them. But we're going to leave public schools alone on that front. It's so ridiculous. And frankly, I don't know if you're aware, my Democrat friends, just how transparent it is. It is embarrassingly transparent. It's embarrassingly transparent that you don't want families to have options. You don't want families to have options, but you also don't want to make sure they can read. You don't want to make sure they can read, and you're already rolling back reforms intended to change reading instruction in this state. You're already rolling them back. You're more concerned about surrendering to this radical ideology and banning curriculum than on whether or not kids can actually read. This is agendas over academics. That's what this is. This is surrendering to your radical ideology and agendas.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Instead of
Representative
actually teaching people to
for what
read.
purpose do you rise?
Representative New Brindley is clearly assigning motives to what we're doing here with this conference committee report, and I suggest we move on.
Representative New Brindley, Mason's manual, section 124, personalities not permitted in debate, not questioning motives. Paragraph 1 is avoid personalities. Paragraph 3 is avoid motives of a member. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd love to have a discussion about that.
That's not what we're on right now. We're on a motion to refuse to adopt.
Because it is not calling anyone's personalities into question or motives to talk about the contents of the bill. And this bill, the language of this bill, surrenders to radical ideology and agendas instead of academics. That's the result of the bill language.
Representative Hollins, for what purpose do you rise?
Masons 124, we're not allowed to bring motives into the conversation. Representative New Brindley is saying literally this is why Democrats are doing something, which is bringing motives into the conversation.
Representative New Brindley, please confine your remarks to what's permitted under Masons 124. Representative New Brindley.
Let me say again, the language of this bill surrenders to radical ideology and agendas instead of academics. That is the language of the bill. That is what this bill does. It doesn't solve a problem. It does nothing to further the education of our children in teaching them to read, in bringing them up to grade level so that, frankly, they can choose whatever book they want to read. Because right now, less than half the kids in this state have that ability. Less than half the kids in this state have the ability to go to their library, pick up a book that should be age appropriate, and read it. They can't do it. And this bill only perpetuates that problem. It does nothing to fix it. It continues the problem of every book being banned for a child who cannot read. Let's stop doing these fiddling around the edges, making adults feel better. Let's stop patting ourselves on the back saying, look at this, I'm doing something. And let's actually do something. And this bill doesn't do it. Let's refuse to adopt, send it back to committee, and actually come up with a product that helps kids.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, I actually can't say it better than Representative New Brindley did. This bill does need to go back, and thank you, Representative Bennett, for the motion. Now, there's a lot of things that we could talk about on this bill. We've talked about the fact that just about 53% of our third graders cannot read at proficiency. Over 50%. Yet we're undoing the things we did last year to try to get them to learn better, try to teach them to read. We're rolling them back and getting rid of the science of reading, which actually works. You're taking something that works and throw it in the trash and bringing back stuff that we know already didn't work. That's brilliant. Now, what happens when the student isn't proficient at reading? Reading proficiency is down 17%. Guess what? If you can't read the word problems in the math class. That's down even more. And if you can't read, you can't understand the science project, which is down 23%. This bill does nothing to help our students. It might be great for the teachers, but I'm more concerned about the students. The students are our future. Without an education, what's our future look like? Now, there's another issue that was talked about, our discipline. I've heard more and more where a student is disruptive, 25, 27 kids in the class, one being disruptive. Guess what? 26 of them the teacher brings out of the room, lets the student that's being disruptive have control of the room, while we have 26 other students not learning. Not learning how to read. Not learning to do their math. Not learning science. Instead of holding the one child accountable and dealing with that one, they're disrupting the entire class, pulling them out from their chance of an education because of one that won't behave. How about if we switch things around? Take that one down to the principal's office and get those other 26 kids the education they deserve, that we pay for, that we expect. Because if a child is unable to read, every book is banned. And when we ban them, they have no opportunity at an education. No opportunity to get ahead for a better life. To a possibility to obtain that generational wealth for their families. To buy that home. To have a wonderful life. It makes me wonder what the agenda is. Graduation rates are stagnant. I'm actually glad with these numbers. Reading down 16%, math 17%, science 23%, 53% of third graders can't read. I'm surprised that a graduation rate is stagnant at a whopping 83%. That's right, we got rid of the graduation standards a couple of years ago. So we don't know if they're actually meeting the standards for graduation. We're just graduating them, giving them a diploma that's worthless. We need to actually start keeping our students accountable, make sure they do their work, make sure that they can read so they can do the math, do the science. It is frustrating with some of the stuff we see in these bills. Mandating our schools and our school boards to do things, making sure they have plans to do this, making sure that they do that, and some of them don't even have that problem in their school. Now with these numbers, reading down 16%, math proficiency down 17, science down 23, less students going to the public schools. We saw that after COVID because many parents saw what was going on in the schools. A lot of times it wasn't teaching how to do things. Some of them contacted me and they said they're done because they don't want the agenda being pushed. We have a problem that we need to fix. And it starts by sending this bill back to conference committee to actually get a bill that'll help our students. Please support the Bennett amendment motion.
The clerk will take the roll on the Bennett motion. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Carroll. Carroll, no.
Carroll, no. Pulowski.
Pulowski, no.
Pulowski, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. We are on the motion to adopt. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File Number 3567, as amended by conference.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that we put the conference committee report to Senate File 3567 on the table.
Representative Long moves that we put Senate File 3567 on the table. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 716. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File Number 716, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to human services, establishing the Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Act.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje, to address the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Today I am presenting House File 912, also known as the African American Family Preservation Act. Madam Speaker, I don't know if we should do the House language first.
Representative Agbaje has a motion at the desk. Let me just put my hands on it. The clerk will report the amendment.
Agbaje moves to amend Senate File Number 716. The fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded DEA 912.
On the Agbaje motion to adopt the House language, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Representative Agbaje, you have one more amendment at the desk. Do you want to explain the bill and then go to that amendment?
Yeah, I'll explain the bill first. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to keep Black families in Minnesota intact when they first come in contact with Child Protective Services. Family separation has long been and continues to be a scourge of American society, with families of color especially feeling the brunt of the disruption, trauma, and pain. For those of you who know this bill, the biggest change in the House language is that this bill has an appropriation of $5 million to do a phase-in program in both Hennepin and Ramsey counties. The statewide implementation will come after the working group provides recommendations to be considered for statewide implementation after the pilot runs. During the pilot, the dedicated working group will review the program and best practices to develop a recommendation for statewide implementation. We know that it is families of color, particularly Black families, that are disproportionately overrepresented in the CPS system as compared to their population in the state. These families find themselves at the mercy of a court system that they know little about, with limited legal support. They are also at a disadvantage when engaging with county workers who may not understand the culture of the family and the community where that child comes from. And over the years, that continues to build a lack of trust and frustration in a system that is supposed to work on behalf of families. And this bill attempts to begin to address those disparities. The data from DHS and others show that African American, Hispanic, and children of 2 or more races are 2 to 7 times more likely than their white counterparts to be in and out of their homes compared to white children. And these disparities show up in the reporting, where African American children are 3 times more likely than their white counterparts to be reported to child protection. And it is noted that these disparities are a result of caseworkers assessing homes and often instituting removal proceedings even when there are no egregious allegations of harm. Caseworkers may see a family in poverty, and that poverty is manifested through housing insecurity or job insecurity or food insecurity. And instead of providing resources for the family, the knee-jerk reaction is to remove the child. Removing children as a response to poverty in Black families is actually more costly than providing those resources directly to the families who are poor. And it should not be the decision of the state to decide whether or not poor people can raise their own children. In order to provide some protections when facing the intricacies of the county and court systems, this bill seeks to require that counties engage in African American Child's Family Network, provide support to obtain services or resources for the family, have a right to counsel for emergency removal hearings, specify that a court cannot terminate an African American parent's rights on the sole basis of a failure to complete a case plan, and provide for cultural competencies trainings for county staff. Hennepin and Ramsey will start the process by showing how counties can use active efforts to preserve the family, or should out-of-home placement be needed, find safe, willing, and able adults in the family network to care for that child. The bill has also gone through revisions to address concerns that various interested parties have in implementing this bill. And one significant change is expanding the need of active efforts for other children who are disproportionately represented in the system. So that would be based on their race, their ethnicity, disability, or income status. The bill also notes that poverty should not be conflated with neglect. And this bill provides for grant funding to help families with material needs. The bill also begins to tighten language to ensure that children will get closer to a permanent placement, ideally with their own parents, or else with someone in the family or kin network if reunification with the parents is not a safe option. The bill codifies 2 policy efforts in DHS to ensure that Black children are properly reviewed and addressed: the African American Child Wellbeing Unit and the African American Child Wellbeing Advisory Council works both with families and the government to ensure better collaboration through recommendations and policy guidelines related to the child protection system. One of the concerns that has been brought up a lot on this bill is the Constitution. And constitutional issues are always a concern for any bill that moves forward. And what we do know is that the Constitution is that it hasn't been the most helpful document for enacting a just and fair society, and neither has the forthcoming jurisprudence. But that is an ongoing debate about how to repair harm done in this country to families when racism is used in specific ways like family separation. And so this bill is an opportunity to begin to determine how do we fight all of the biases in the system with the goal of keeping families together. And in order to mitigate those risks, that's why the bill covers more children and includes a severability clause to maintain the provisions in this bill that can be implemented without a consideration for race. At the end of the day, we all know that healthy families are vital to the success of our children and ultimately our state. Everyone has a stake in ensuring Minnesota's child protection system is fair and equitable. And your support of this bill will help decrease racial disparities and the injustices faced by these families. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Agbaje moves to amend Senate File Number 716, the fourth engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A4.
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment is to make abundantly clear that the purpose of this bill is not to infringe on the sovereign rights of our tribal nations. The bill currently states that the provisions in this bill do not interfere with ICWA or MIFPA. The amendment reiterates that a mixed-race child who is indigenous must follow the Indian Child Welfare Act procedures, which is currently federal law. Thank you. Oh, and I would urge a yes vote.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Agbaje, for your work on this issue and for bringing this amendment. We know that the systemic realities of white supremacy and colonization negatively impact all of our kids, and it is important to recognize the legal distinction between the political identity of our Native kids is distinct and different, and so I think it is important that we make that clear in the language, and I encourage a green vote and thank Representative Agbaje for her work on this issue.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 716, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to the bill. The member from Crow Wing, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll start off by reading a portion of this bill. To protect the best interests of African American and disproportionately represented children. Disproportionately represented children. If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. Goes on to say, promote the stability and security of African American and disproportionately represented children and their families by establishing minimum standards to prevent the arbitrary and unnecessary removal of African American and disproportionately represented children from their families. And I don't think any of us want that. When people, especially children, are represented disproportionately. This subject will break your heart if you let it. It also breaks God Almighty's heart. You know, Jesus, you can read in the Gospels how much he loved children. When even his own disciples, his own apostles that he called forth, one day the crowds were gathering around Jesus, and the children were just trying to get to him. And the apostles actually shunned away the children. And they had missed something that Jesus was trying to teach them. And he actually rebuked them. And he said, let the little children come unto me, for such as these belongs to the kingdom of heaven. So this matter is very important to God, therefore it's very important to me, and I believe it's important to many of us sitting in these seats today. I'll read to you a section from the Old Testament, a direct quote from God Almighty from Malachi chapter 4. At the very end of it, at the very end, to close out what we call the Old Testament, I don't think that's what God calls it, but it says, remember the law of Moses, my servant, when I commanded him in the Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and the judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. The relationship between a parent and a child is so important to God that he even says right here, if it doesn't happen, I'm going to come and strike the earth with a curse. Wow. God takes that relationship pretty seriously. to turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the fathers to the children, because there was a breakdown within the family. And we see that happen today, where there's a breakdown in the family because a parent, and I'll just give this example. I worked in a faith-based drug and alcohol treatment program for 12 years, and I saw this a lot. I have a lot of experience with this. Where a child is removed from the home. I don't ever want to see that. When a child is removed from their parents, from the home. Ouch. And I have thoughts of, I wonder what that child is going through right now. Being pulled from their mommy or their daddy or both. If that doesn't get your attention and give you a gut-wrenching feeling, I don't know what will. But it certainly does to God Almighty. He is love. And that's no laughing matter. He is love. And every child loves their parent. And I believe that every parent deserves a second or a third or a fourth chance. And I understand the system, too, that we don't want to put a child in harm's way. But I had the privilege of seeing men come into that program and absolutely change their lives and get that next chance and be reunited with their children and go on to become a great father. I had the honor and privilege of seeing that for 12 straight years because it would happen every year. Sometimes few, sometimes many. And if the system is broken, we need to fix it. And if we have to do that one group at a time, I'm all for it. And that's why I'll be voting green on this bill today. I will be voting in support, Representative Agbaje, for this bill today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I think back on my own childhood, son of a black father and a white mother, and it never occurred to me that it might be even remotely possible that I could be taken from them. But when I'm honest and I look back at certain circumstances at certain times, my mom was on disability. My dad, he worked really hard, and because of that, he wasn't at home a lot. There was a period of time where he was working overnights, and he was going to school in the afternoon, and he was sleeping all day. So I effectively just didn't see him, except for on the weekends, on his days off, what he called his weekends, not necessarily Saturday and Sunday. And I can certainly think back on times when, if somebody from outside had walked into the house and assessed the circumstances, in their arbitrary, subjective judgment of that moment, they may have labeled it neglect. But we were fine. We did just fine, my sisters and I. And when I contemplate the possibility that because of that snap, arbitrary judgment in the moment, I or my sisters could have been removed from everything we knew, everything we cared about, everything we were familiar with, and thrust into the unknown. It's unfathomable. I really can't begin to comprehend what that would have felt like. And yet that is a reality that black children and other children are facing here in the state of Minnesota. I also look back on, the parenting of my own children. I'm sure we can all, if we're really honest with ourselves and we sort through the fine sands of moments and incidents, there's some low points where we weren't on our A game on a particular day. And if somebody were to step in on that moment and say, aha, you're a bad parent, I'm going to take your kid away. That's a punishment. That's a punishment that's on par with, if not worse, than incarceration. And we have this whole process for incarceration where you have to prove evidence of having committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. You go through this whole due process. You're judged in an adversarial process where you get the opportunity to face your accuser and defend yourself. And you get counsel. You have somebody sitting next to you, advising you. But with this process, with CPS, you're often left to navigate it without the aids. And the consequences are just as dire. And so I'm happy to rise in support of this today. I encourage members to vote yes. I highly suspect, although I can't say for sure, that we're going to see a very green board today. And that is because I think we all can value and all do value the importance of family and the importance of parenthood and keeping kids with their families. And I just want to point out, I don't want to take a lot of time today because this is not any one person's moment here today. First of all, thank you, Representative Agbaje and Representative Frazier, for allowing me to engage with this and answering my questions and answering some of the concerns from our side that we had side conversations about and clarified so we could understand what's happening here today. But I just want to make this point. This and the Indian Family Preservation Act that we passed last year are examples of two moments that have occurred in this chamber during this term where it's been really beneficial to muscle past the rhetoric, which is not always easy. There are certain words, certain phrases, certain claims that can push people back into their corner to where they don't want to engage with the problem anymore because they're triggered. And in this case, you really have to push back past the rhetoric and focus on the impact. What's the impact of what this bill is doing here today? The impact is that black kids are going to be able to stay with their parents. Or if not, if they can't, with an auntie, with an uncle, with a grandma, with a grandpa, in the community that they know, their community. And that impact is more important than any rhetoric. The pointing out of disparate impacts, it's real, it's true, that's been demonstrated. And I think, we can jump to the term white supremacy was evoked. That's one of those trigger words, one of those trigger terms, pushes people back in their corner, makes them defensive. I like to save that phrase for people who think that me and my sons are abominations, actual white supremacists. But be that as it may, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day why this disparate impact exists. It exists. And so let's do something about it today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Agbaje. Also, the authors that were in this chamber before that mentored us to be in these seats that we are here today to fight for justice and to fight on behalf of this, when we talk about our black community, when we talk about our black children. I want to thank Representative Rena Moran because she carried this, as we all, specifically when we go back to talking about our black roots, our ancestors of Africa, whether it's by the ways of the chains that came to the south of this country, that came up to Chicago, that came to St. Paul to build these spaces that are here, or my Black and African roots of Borinquen, by ways of Ponce and Vega Baja and Loíza, we're here to work together in this body to make sure that we're speaking up against racial discrimination and child welfare that is a human rights violation. Today here in this chamber, we're doing the works of our ancestors. Representative Agbaje, members of our Posse Caucus, we have held and we continue to hold these difficult conversations of the reality of what we spoke about, and I have the right to speak about in our Children and Families Committee when we first heard this bill, when we talk about bringing healing to wounds, and this is a step forward. And I look to many of you in the chamber of our communities that we know that this is a step moving pa'lante, a step of ache, of blessings when we talk about how we're leading in Minnesota. This isn't just about talking about children. This is the reality of talking about the history of discrimination that lives in the seeds that we birth. The reality of there is a privilege. There is a systemic privilege. There is a race privilege. And today we're taking those steps as Minnesotans and as elected officials that are placed here, regardless of what side of this chamber you sit on, that we're moving a step forward to say our communities all do better when we fight for one another, when we fight for what's wrong. What's wrong is that we even have to fight about this. What's wrong is that we even have to address that these are the realities. These are the phone calls that we hear from family members that fear that their kids are going to be taken away by the injustices that many folks don't face. And so with this saying, I want to thank the leadership. I want to thank those conversations that have not been easy and the continued conversations that will not be easy because we have to continue to fight for these initiatives and make things better. On behalf of folks that come from all over, this is a global issue that we're changing here today in the state of Minnesota, that we're leading by example by showing that we care about our kids, that we care about the kids that we birth, that we care about the kids that we're fighting for childcare for, that we're fighting for health care for, that we're fighting for their education for. But it starts, you know where? In the home, in the houses, with the nutrition as mothers that we know, as aunties, as uncles, as big cousins, stepmoms, village. Because in our communities, you don't necessarily have to be blood to be family. You become family by recognizing that you're surviving together. And today, I'm really proud, and I urge members across all sides, across all tribes, all barrios, all hoods, to think about the Black kings and Black queens that have lived with the pain, but that see justice today when we push for a green vote, that there are steps in making the future Black kings and queens feel the worth and the praises of their ancestors who are with us today through this policy. I urge a green vote.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'll be brief, but thank you, Representative Agbaje, for your work on this. I know it's been a long, hard road, and we've been talking about this bill since the time we got here. So it's really nice to see it on the floor. I want to come at this from the perspective of somebody who practiced family law. And when I say family law, I mean the whole family, not just child protection, not just, the whole family. And what I see from this, and I know we've been talking a lot about, like, do we do things that make adults feel better for children? But what I want to say in this context is there's nothing that makes adults feel worse than taking their kids away. And I have seen that again and again. And we all have faults. We all have things that maybe we've done wrong. But the second that you take someone's child from them, you remove their reason for getting better. and I have seen it with my own eyes. I have seen people relapse into addiction. I have seen people stop their therapy sessions. I have seen people literally give up, not try to find housing, just stop. And so if we can keep families together, if we can keep that glimmer of hope alive, that somebody still gets to interact and be a part of a family, to see their children, that's huge. And in my time doing family law, I have seen children taken away for things that would not have happened in other circumstances because of a house that's too dirty, because of lack of transportation, you know, a whole host of things. And it's profoundly upsetting to those adults who are trying their best and who, for a number of reasons, systemic reasons, are unable to do everything that the system has decided is what needs to be done. So I really thank you for bringing this legislation forward. It's important to me, it's important to our community, and it's important to give our community hope for the future. Families deserve to be together. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a letter here from our former colleague, Rena Moran, who's currently the commissioner for Ramsey County. She has worked on this bill for many years, and she sent me a letter, and I'm going to read that letter before my comments. My name is Rena Moran, former state representative of District 62A, and 65A, 62A used to be mine, 65A, sorry, and current Ramsey County Commissioner of District 4 in St. Paul, the great-granddaughter of a slave. As a state representative, I was the first author of the African American Family Preservation Act. Today, I write in support of this bill. Family separation and separation of black children from their families is in the DNA of the United States of America. Night and day, you could hear men and women screaming, "Ma, Pa, sister, or brother" were taken without any warning. People were always dying from a broken heart. During a 1938 interview with Susan Hamilton, a woman still traumatized by slave actions she had witnessed as a child, Hamilton's recollection offers so much understanding of what black families faced during the enslavement. An incomprehensible level of sadness, pain, anger, and confusion and powerlessness. Sadly, today we continue to hear these stories, sometimes to deaf ears. For the past almost 45 years, families have come to this Capitol sharing and reliving traumatic stories over and over again of family separation from their children that should not have been occurred. In the late 70s, this issue of children being removed from their homes was one of the most pressing issues of the day, and here we are today, with the hopes that our cries do not fall on deaf ears again. It's not lost to me, and I think you should all take a moment to reflect that the separation of black families was a significant contribution factor to wealth building in this country. Make no mistake, not only was it profitable, it was also brutal, violent, a system of exploitation, dominance, and control. Today, the sadness, the pain, the trauma, and the injustice of yesterday is still with us. See and feel our pain, our historical pain. The question is, what will history say about this body of lawmakers? What will be the story, and how will you create a better tomorrow for black children in Minnesota and for children who are being disproportionately separated from their families? What will be the story we tell to our families of Democrats of 2024? We see you, we hear you, we're watching you. You have the power to begin to create a more fair, just, and equitable system that represents all of us, this moment in time matters. That was our former colleague, Representative Rena Moran, and I'm not going to say much. I think everybody have heard from others who are much more in tune with this issue. I used to be a Hennepin County child protection worker many years ago. One of the reasons why I left the county and I quit my job and I couldn't do it anymore was because it's a system that was set up to fail families. Social workers would go into homes and say their homes are dirty, so that means they don't care about their children. Not factoring in that a dirty home could mean that a person doesn't have the money to buy the ingredients to clean their house. Soap costs money, detergent costs money, and not factoring in mental illness, not factoring in trauma, not factoring in historical trauma, not factoring in poverty. So I say today that this bill is about justice. It's about keeping children with their families. It's about rewriting all the wrongs of the past. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, today for the debate. Before I go into my closing remarks, I really want, as everyone has mentioned, I want to thank two really important people. Former Representative Rena Moran, who I don't think is here today, but she is the one who started this process, started with carrying the bill, and has really continued to help put Black children first and foremost on this particular issue. And second, I want to thank Khalees Houston, one of the community advocates whose fierce passion and advocacy has been admirable to watch. We don't, that's good, thank you. So one thing that she says is that this bill is about safe adults. Sometimes what happens is people think we want people to stay, or we want children to stay in unsafe situations. That is not the case. This bill is only to provide resources and support for parents and family members who are safe adults to be with those children. So I'm grateful to both of those people for their previous efforts, and I'm happy to help carry this bill to the floor and hopefully get it across the finish line this year. This bill can be the support needed for many Black families and other families of color in Minnesota so that they do not have to go through the same pain of having a child taken away from them unnecessarily, and those children do not have to go through that same pain of being removed from their family and their community structure, thus disrupting their sense of family life and their sense of identity. With this bill, this is a first step along the way to ensuring that we can keep more families together and keep Minnesota a safe place and a good place to raise a family. I urge members to vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Pawlowski.
Pawlowski, aye.
Pawlowski, aye.
So members and folks in the gallery, after I announce the vote total, we're going to go back to business of the House on another matter. So the clerk will close the roll. There being 120 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that Senate File 3567 be taken from the table.
Representative Long moves that Senate File 3567 be taken from the table. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The bill is before us. We are on passage. I have a short list from the Republicans for third reading. I don't have any list from the Democrats. The member from Douglas, Representative Franson. On Senate file, the Education Policy Conference Committee report. Third reading.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Members, I'm going to ask you to vote no on the education policy bill. Members, I have this issue in my district, and I really honestly thought that this body would take care of it and come together to protect children. Instead, I have a child that had been sexually assaulted in school by another student who has been forced to leave that school to attend a different school in order to get an education. This child did absolutely nothing wrong, yet he is being treated as he is the victim. When this bill first came up on the House floor, I was told that we would work on it for the education finance policy bill. So I offered that amendment, and the body voted it down. Not the entire body, of course. It was just the majority party that voted it down. It's a very important issue. Democrats say, oh, the child can go to school, and the child that was the perpetrator who did a horrific thing on another student, the school that he is attending can take that child out and move him to an alternative setting. However, the school district does not believe that is the case. And so simply my language would have been make it easier for the school to remove somebody that had done horrific things to another student and remove that child, to make it easier, to make the language clearer. So I'm very disappointed. The family is very disappointed. And the child is very disappointed. Members, we all represent our districts. And when we have constituent issues that come up, usually we all work together to make sure that that issue is solved. Yet for some reason, on this particular issue, when a child has been sexually assaulted in school, the majority party said, nope, not going to help, not going to make the law clearer. It's very disappointing. It's very sad. We hear time and time again, if we can just save one life, right? Well, I was asking, still asking, if we can keep one child into the school that they deserve to be in without being treated like they are a criminal, like they did something wrong, that they should be ashamed of what happened to them. In this body, in this building, if another member sexually assaults another member, that member has to resign. Unless, of course, if you burglarize somebody's house. So there's two different standards. We have a standard for us here in this building, and then we have another standard for students in a school. So members, I ask you to vote no on this provision, or on this bill, because it's not ready for prime time. We still have a child out there that is unable to get the education he deserves at the school where his friends attend, and the teachers that he has grown to love, where he has had an education that he is quite pleased with, and now attending another school, being forced to make new friendships, and being treated like he did something wrong. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Washington, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker. I had talked earlier about some of the exclusionary discipline issues, which Representative Franson just gave you some real-life effects on these policies, bad policies, and others that have been passed by the majority, and that I had hoped we would be fixing again this year. You know, we go back to what did we do in the education committees in the last, I guess, year and a half. The number one problem we have is kids that can't read. That's the number one problem. The next biggest problem we have is truancy and disciplinary issues. The READ Act that was passed was good, but it wasn't enough. It absolutely wasn't enough. And it's taking too long, and now what we're doing is we're adding more mandates on curriculum, and we're picking at the edges rather than actually helping our kids with extra time, with extra tutoring. I mean, frankly, members, last summer and this summer, we should have had all-day programs in all the schools with all the money we spent in education. We should have had all-day programs getting our kids caught up last summer and this summer. And that's what should be in this policy bill. But it's not. Instead, it doesn't fix the issues that were created. It doesn't help much getting our kids to read. It doesn't help with their math, the fact that they're way behind in math. They're way behind in science. Science down 23%. 23% since in the last 4 years. I'll tell you the number that is up over 20% is the education department budgets, the bureaucracy. So we've dumped money and policy into bureaucrats in an agency that frankly has shown that they're have huge problems. They're the people that we're supposed to oversee the Feeding Our Future and many of the other scandals, huge scandals that this state has had over the last couple of years. But we're rewarding them, giving them more money, giving them more power, taking away power from our local school boards. We're taking away power from our parents. We're taking away power from our teachers and our administrators, and we're giving it to the bureaucrats, the Department of Education. And that's what this bill does. I believe in local control. I believe in our educators. I believe in our teachers. I believe in our administrators. They're the experts. And we should be letting them do what's best for their own students and their own districts. We should be letting them deal with some of the disciplinary issues rather than telling them, no, you can't do it. You can't, because we at the state know best, and people at the Department of Education know best, and you don't know. And we're leaving these folks hanging out to dry, the teachers and the administrators. We're leaving them so that they're the ones that get the angry phone calls from parents. They're the ones that have to explain why they can't deal with something, explain why they can't solve the problem, explain to the parents of people like Representative Franson's parents, students that she was talking about, that they have to explain to them that, hey, there's nothing we can do and your kid will have to be the one to leave instead of the kid that's the problem. That's just wrong. It's wrong. And so I feel, frankly, I'm lucky that my kids are now officially, as of next week, even out of college. I feel that, but I'm the norm, or that I'm not the norm. We have a huge generation of kids that are struggling. And instead, rather than teaching them, rather than spending money to help them learn to read, to get them caught up, to give them a safe environment in schools, we are making the schools unsafe for our kids because of the disciplinary things that we have mandated here at the state. So I don't support this bill. We didn't deal with what needed to be done, and I ask members to vote against the bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And I too would ask members to vote red. We tried to get this to go back to conference to fix. You know, we talk about how our second year of the biennium is really supposed to be going back and doing some small changes, seeing what maybe didn't work and fixing that, doing focused funding on core functions and doing bonding, and then get out. And instead, what we have in policy, even though we passed the majority party passed 65 new mandates on our schools, we have a 120-page new education, new changes, new things, even though our schools are reeling from the changes that were passed last year. I do want to just address two more things. We already heard all of the stuff that I've talked about before, and so I don't need to repeat all of that. But I do wanted to just say that it just seems, again, like there's a lot of deflection going on. About 3 weeks ago, when we talked about the changes to the READ Act, that was just really important. I was told that, you know, potato, potato, it's all just a vegetable. Today, when we talk about the book ban and, you know, really we should be focusing on teaching kiddos how to read, I get told, oh, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Not quite sure what this obsession with food is, but I'm not teaching kids how to chew gum. That's not my job. My job isn't teaching kids how to chew gum, and that's not our teacher's job. That's not what we're talking about in this bill. We're not talking about chewing gum. We're talking about reading. We're talking about literacy. We're talking about making sure that our kids can read. It's not okay to just shirk it off as just, oh, look, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. It's not a vegetable. It's the foundation of how we learn. And the claim that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, well, apparently we can't because our kids are not reading at grade level. So let's actually do this, shall we? And the only other thing that I'd like to propose, that I'd like to bring to members' attention is actually on page 66, and this is the audit of our professional licensure, education licensing, looking at our teacher prep schools and making sure that they're following, that they're actually teaching teachers how to be taught in the science of reading. In the minorities bill, it was really important for this to be in there because we wanted to make sure that we were holding institutions accountable, that if they did not produce teachers that knew how to teach reading, that there were repercussions for that. You receive state money and tuition with the actual stated goal that you are going to provide education to these future teachers that they then can teach students. That's a contract that was made. And it's not happening. We hear over and over again that our teachers are not being taught in how to teach reading. And so having this audit is actually really imperative. But yet the audit that is included in this bill is weak. It's toothless. It says that it just has to submit an initial support. It says that it has to just tell us, hey, who's actually effective and who's not. And that doesn't, okay, good, I guess, with data. Yay, I'm glad that we're going to get data. But we need to be able to hold these institutions accountable. We need to be able to hold them accountable. You've heard so many times from this side of the aisle about the reasons why we can't support this bill. We had examples already this morning about why it's important to have bipartisan effort. This isn't a bipartisan effort. It's not even something that our Minnesota School Boards Associations are asking for. They're asking for relief. They're asking for help. They're asking for something that is going to actually get to their classes, that gets to their students, and this doesn't do that. And so with all the reasons that you heard from my last speech and for this extra one that I was talking about today, I would urge members a red vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in opposition to this report. We had a lot of hope last session with the passage of the READ Act, and I thought that we were having strong bipartisan support for the science of reading, phonics-driven literacy in the state. And it wasn't the bill I would have written, but it was a start, and it was an acknowledgement bipartisanly that that really mattered. And this bill is turning back on that commitment, and it's very disappointing. I just want to remind people how long we have been dealing with a literacy crisis in our state and in our nation. I first got interested in politics because of a report that many of you weren't even born for, but it was called A Nation at Risk in 1983. And seeing the education crisis back then as a high school student, I really wanted to get involved and work on that. And over the years, in different capacities, I've had the chance to work on education reform. And the most promising reform we've seen to date in this country is the science of reading. And many of you listened to the podcast last year called Sold a Story that really outlined why the science of reading is a game changer for literacy, for students in every demographic. And we have a terrible achievement gap in this state, members. And achievement gap is something I've been working on for 25 years. And this actually moves the needle on literacy. It doesn't solve every problem, but it would make a material difference. And we don't have to guess. We know other states that have adopted the science of reading, and their test scores across the board in every demographic have gone up and have made a material difference in not only in their scores. Members, this is so not about scores. This is about life trajectory. If you read at grade level, then you have much better outcomes for health, for economics, for longevity, for all the measures of a good life. Reading is fundamental to all of those things. And we are so missing the boat. So a couple states that are doing this better than we are Alabama and Louisiana. Alabama went in 2019 from ranked 49th to being ranked 4th by 2022. Louisiana went from 42nd to 11th. And members, during the pandemic, these states made actual gains in literacy while we were going backwards by 20 points. They were making small gains even during the pandemic. So we know the science of reading works. We made a small attempt towards it last year. I have to say, one of the frustrating things about being in the minority is I have been working on this for a long time. I'm not an expert, but I know quite a bit about it. I work closely with the head of schools from Mississippi who implemented this revolutionary science of reading program. My bill mirrors a lot of what they do in Mississippi. I work directly with the superintendent of schools in Mississippi in crafting my bill. I tried to get hearings on my bill for the last 4 years, not once. I tried to get meetings when the DFL had their literacy bill. Oh, can I sit in on it? Can I give some feedback? Can I participate? Not once. I was never even invited to a meeting, even though I asked repeatedly. And this shouldn't be a partisan issue, members. And now that you've turned it into a partisan issue, and now are rolling back the clock, we are risking the future of all the different groups in our state. So I just want to remind you, last year when we celebrated, oh, we're going to really make a change on reading, this is where we were at. These are data that were put out last August 2023. Statewide, our students, 45% are proficient in math. 45% of our students have proficiency in math, 50% in reading. That's across all demographics. That's the average. If you drill down, members, African Americans, this is heartbreaking. 21%, 1/5 of our African American students are proficient in math. 31% are proficient in reading. Only 1/3 of the African American kids in our state are proficient in reading. Asian students, 42% are proficient in math, 44% are proficient in reading. White students, it's 55% in math, 58% in reading. American Indian students, members, 24% are proficient in math and 32% proficient in reading. Latino students, 23% proficient in math, 30% in reading. Only 1/3 of our kids, members, in our minority groups, and in some cases only 1/4 of them, can read and do math. This is an existential crisis for these individual students and for our state. And this bill does nothing to address it. And I don't know what it will take to get your attention. 10%? Like 90% of our kids won't be able to do things and then we'll make changes? Members, this is a shocking turning our backs on what I thought last year I had some hope was a bipartisan commitment to moving the needle on literacy, and it's so disappointing. A little good news I just want to highlight, I do think it will help in another area of mental health, is the effort to try to limit cell phone use in schools. And the language in this bill is not exactly what I would have done. It's Representative Feist's version, but I was very pleased that Representative Feist was willing to work with me on this and that we are getting somewhere on trying to convince schools to limit cell phone use. There are a lot of challenges with mental health in our schools, and this is the most low-hanging fruit, members. And I see it in my district. I have schools that have limited cell phone use during instruction time, and it has completely changed the game in terms of focus, climate, fights, engagement. The teachers are happier. So members, please go back to your districts this session, this interim, and encourage your schools next fall to adopt limiting cell phone use in schools. So I'm pleased with that, but the rest of it, members, is so far shy of what we need to be doing for literacy, and I urge a no vote.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, for the debate and discussion on this bill. I just wish that this bill could have been more bipartisan, could have earned the support of more Minnesotans, could have engaged more communities, and could have been more representative of the people of Minnesota. I'm concerned about the way that we continue to discriminate against people of faith and the decisions that have been made over PSEO. It was made mention, I believe, in this chamber directly, that it was just a minor subset of the Christian faith that it's been discriminated by the practices of the PSEO program. That could have been changed inside this bill to help make this bill bipartisan, to make this bill more inclusive. I'm disappointed that while we hear the chief executive of this state talk about things like book bans and thinking that that's going to be more inclusive, banning book bans, that we have a bill before us that's limiting free speech, limiting the First Amendment, and that the governor thinks that that's okay. I'm disappointed by that. I'm concerned, like many in this chamber, about the impacts to local control, taking the decisions out of local schools and communities and people elected to positions that direct the decision-making about books in local communities. Local decisions and local control is the best route of action, and this legislature thinks that they know better. That's disappointing. For me, as I listen to the communities, to the parents, to the teachers, to the administrators, to the school board members back home in my own district, I listen to the things and the words that they say and the concerns that they bring forward about how school is going back home. And I don't think that this bill is a good representation of their needs or concerns. continued frustration that they can't help the students of this state course correct and become better, more professional, more law-abiding adults. This should have been the vehicle to change this bill. This education policy bill should have been the bill to help with the course correction that happens inside of our classrooms. And I'm disappointed that it doesn't. I'm disappointed that it's going to be the students that rule the roost, that the students who haven't reached a full age of maturity are going to be the ones setting the standards. This should have been led first by our parents, by our local school districts, the administrators, and the teachers. It's the teachers who have reached out to me the most about the fact that they can't properly discipline students who are out of line in our schools. Frankly, I think it's unreasonable, wholly unreasonable, to continue with this policy where students set the standard of what things happen inside of a classroom. And to hear the stories of the things that have happened since that time, of students being bullied, of frankly, of violence happening inside of our schools from student to student. And that tools have been taken out of the toolbox by this legislature to get kids back on the right track. This bill does not represent the needs of my community, and I'll be voting no.
I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I actually my first administrative job was in Representative Schultz's district and I had the pleasure to work with just an amazing principal as my mentor. I was his assistant principal, and I learned so much from him about how to lead and really serve your community. And I think I go back to some of the conversations that he and I had really around expectations. And when you raise the bar, people meet that bar. Whether it's a student, whether it's my own children, whether it's us in this body, when we hold each other to high standards, we can meet those standards. And that's why I appreciate putting the language back in and correcting the error around the MCA reporting. That is a good thing, but we need to continually remember that expectations matter. We need to hold ourselves, we need to hold our communities, we need to hold our kids, our teachers to high expectations. And there's no one better to do that than our local officials, our locally elected school boards. And I think that's really the piece that is the most frustrating in this, when I look at this bill and really the totality of the 2-year biennium. Really what we said is, in this body, we know better how to handle school districts across the state. Okay, I've never been to many of your districts. I have no business telling your local school boards, your local administration, your local teachers how to run things. But that's what we did. And I look at the non-exclusionary discipline. That's just one of the 65 mandates. I'm sorry, but that is a terrible policy. There is not one principal that I've ever worked with in my near 20 years as administrator that has said, boy, I really want to suspend kids. That's really going to help things if I suspend a kid from school. Nothing's further from the truth. But what we've done is created this culture that, we know better, and we've moved away from holding people accountable, holding students accountable. And I go all the way back to a training that I went to when I was in Malacca. And the trainer talked about a continuum of behaviors. It applies to all of us. But in the context of schools, If you address things at a very low level, it does not escalate into a bigger issue. So if you address the eye roll from a student, you don't have to address the fist fight later on. You don't have to address the teacher being pushed later on if you address things at the low level. What we did last year and in this continued bill is continue to tie the hands of our local educators. And when we don't empower local control, we do not allow our school districts to engage in partnerships with parents. And Representative Fischer talked about we need to have a ban on book banning because we want to create global students, I think is the word he used. I agree. But that should be done at the local level. There's a process that districts have to have, whether it be curriculum, materials, there's a curriculum adoption process in place that engages parents. But nope, we want to have nice bumper stickers, so we're going to talk about book banning. I think the most disappointing comment, the most disappointing thing of this session is I heard a member of this body say that we are making it harder for principals. We are making it harder for superintendents. And you know what? Mission accomplished. If that's truly your goal, well done, because you did make it harder, not only for principals, not only for superintendents, but the teachers in the kids' classroom, and you made it harder for kids as well. Well done.
I recognize the member from Meeker, Representative Erdl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And for some of you who don't know, I was a social studies teacher for 35 years, and so well acquainted with what happens in classrooms and the potential for even violence in classrooms. Not particularly in mine, but this is an issue that I have been concerned about over the years, particularly in my career as a legislator. And that is that there are episodes in our classrooms where staff are subject to violence. And I have, over the years, proposed legislation that would address that. And it disappoints me that it hasn't reached the level where it's been included in a bill. And I've tried in my legislation to be very cognizant of the situations and needs of the students as well as of the staff member. I offered a provision that was non-exclusionary. If a student did some act of violence on a staff member, they wouldn't be kicked out of school or even removed from the classroom, except for a brief time, to try to ascertain why this happened. If a student is having problems, an example that I have, and I've relayed this several times, I think, in either committee or on the floor, I know of a teacher who was picked up and by a second grade boy. She was a very petite lady, and the boy was a bit older than second grade level. He picked her up and dropped her on her head, and she broke her neck. Now, that woman's career as an educator ended that day. The boy just went back to class. And where there are things like that that happened, we should at least find out why. Why is there this problem in class with this teacher or this staff member? But largely, those types of situations are not being addressed. And things just go on as usual right now. So I'm not speaking for exclusionary tactics, but at least let's take the time to try to figure out why we have a problem.
I recognize the member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for the discussion on this bill. There are a number of items in this bill that I support, and herein lies the weakness of omnibus bills. I wish they would be separate because I'd vote for them. But in the end, on the whole, I don't believe that this bill makes the grade, and two big reasons in my mind. One, it doesn't make the grade for schools. Last year, schools were inundated with a huge number of mandates. They're swimming under those mandates, keeping their noses just above water. And this bill adds more, when it really should be adjusting those mandates, backing off some of them, delaying some of them, so that our schools can get their feet on the floor and get some work done on these. We have literally mandated some districts into budget deficits. That's a shame. This bill also does not make the grade for students. Every child deserves the right to read well. It's critical, it's essential. It's one of the opportunity door openers for life. We should be doing everything we can to make that happen. I love Representative Mueller's quote, "Readers are leaders." That's so true, and every child in this state should have the opportunity to be a leader, and that means they need to be able to read well. Instead, we're prohibiting book banning, what is being called banning, just filtering, in children's libraries. And yet we're allowing book banning in our reading curriculum. Curriculum that is excellent, science of reading based, proven, and yet it very well could be banned because perhaps there are too many white authors and white illustrators. That's wrong. We need to put curriculum before our children that works, because they deserve to read. Every child deserves to read. So I'm sorry to say I am recommending a no vote on this. There are good components in it, but in the end, it just doesn't make the grade. Thank you.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I'm just going to start with a reminder that I have done thank yous before, and they all stand good for this bill too, so I won't close with that, except for to thank Representative Bennett for a very thoughtful and specific critique of why someone could vote no to this bill. And I appreciate the way you used your time to help the body understand from your perspective what was good and what was weak, and a reason to vote. So I do want to thank you for that. And I think that was in the spirit that we share, which is that we want to do best for our kids and we want to do best for our families in the state for now and into the future. So that I hope we can share in that. And now I will tell you why you should vote yes to this bill, because that's how we do things. And there's a lot of strong reasons for voting yes. But I will start by going back to some of the arguments and discussions that we've had by last year's bill, which was also discussed again on the floor today, and particularly on the provisions on discipline. So what we know in this state, and we've seen data, study after study, we have heard the families come forward, we have heard students come forward and talk about the disparities we have in discipline in our schools. And what we passed last year for the continuum that we want schools to follow as they discipline students, and saying suspensions would be the last choice. And that's what we passed. We didn't take that tool out of the toolbox, but just as Representative Baker described it, we put into statute that best practices that principals and teachers are using right now which is to say there's a continuum for holding students accountable for their behavior. And that removing a child from the education, their place of their education, should always be a last resort and not a first one. So if someone is rolling their eyes in class, you don't send them home. If someone pulls out their chapstick and the teacher says, put it away, and they don't put away their chapstick, you don't send the kindergartner home for doing that. And that's the legislation we passed last year. And yes, we made it more difficult for principals and superintendents because they had to evaluate, they have to. We are holding them accountable for evaluating their policies and making sure that they are not disproportionately having an impact on our kids of color. And this is important because this is Minnesota today. And we are a diverse body. We are a diverse state, and we have diverse classrooms. The most diverse part of our population is our young population, and it starts in preschool and kindergarten. And we want those kids to be we want the people responsible, the adults in the classroom. We want to make sure they're doing the right thing for all of our kids. That was last year. Okay, on to this year. All right, so the big one, I think, the difference is we are talking about prohibiting book bans. And what we're saying is this access of information, which has been curated by people with expertise in this area, somebody can't come forward and say, I don't want my kid to be reading this, therefore no kid can read it. And that's what bans are. You take the information out of the library, you take this access to opinions and these diverse world views, you take them out of the library and you say nobody can read them. And then we're saying, but we also don't say, we say who's responsible for making sure there is curriculum? And it's the people, that's their job. They have the expertise, and this bill says that we need to have a policy so that local officials, we give them the support they need to make these decisions. And this is a problem right now, and librarians and school districts are asking us to fix it. And that's why this language is in the bill, because it's a problem right now in Minnesota. All right, we talked a lot about the READ Act, and Representative Edelson is not here where I can keep looking at her and smiling. And I want to talk about the process that we put together the READ Act. And there has been some, I would say, very much mischaracterization. I can't say it, sorry. You have not gotten it right about what we're doing about the READ Act. There is no way, nothing remotely pulls back from our mandate to use best practices to teach reading. That's the READ Act. What it does, mostly what we have right now, is giving more flexibility for schools. But we're also, the other thing that happened this year is we're recognizing that the content is good for teaching reading, but the content falls short for addressing the diversity that we see in our classrooms. And what we did, and what Representative Edelson did, is, again, it didn't shut down this different curriculum from being used, but what they're saying, work with the publishers, let's get better curriculum. We can do both. We can use the science of reading, we can use best practices, and we can reflect the diverse community that's in our school in positive lights. And that's the way we teach all kids to read. And that's what we want to do better at. And that's what's in this bill. That's the policy that's in this bill. All right, let's see. All right, and then what people keep saying, mandate, mandate, mandate. So again, in this bill, not in last year's bill, we've had that discussion. There are some things that we're requiring schools to do. The big one, I'd say, well, other than the READ Act, which is from beginning to end is actually just a mandate on our schools. So to be clear, the mandates from last year that had the impact on the schools are saying we're going to use best practices for teaching reading. Another one that we have is on cell phone policy. And the heroes in this piece of legislation, other than the people that worked on it, are actually our Principals Association. Because they stepped forward and said, yes, Cell phone use is right now in many of our schools, and going forward is going to be more and more of an issue. And again, when you read the studies, when you read the reports, you know that a lot of the mental health issues, the behavior issues are stemmed from this, something that's different, that wasn't in school when not when I was for sure, but even when the youngest people here were in school. These were not in schools the way they are right now. This is a problem we're facing in our schools right now. The Principals Association has stepped forward and said, yes, we will put together best practices for dealing with cell phone use in schools. And then we're going to get it out across the state. So all school districts will now be taking that seriously. This is accountability. All right, then I'm just going to go through the list of some other things that are in the bill that you may have forgotten about, and how it impacts student lives. All right, eliminating unnecessary paperwork in the special education. Representative Hicks, folks, if you said there was nothing important in this bill that needed to get passed, go talk to your special education teachers and say, hey, did you think this provision was important or not? They would be pulling their hair out to know that you were willing to dismiss this really important clarification that we had on special education paperwork. It was really very thoughtfully put together. It's going to have a huge impact on our special education teachers and the time that they will have to spend with the kids, rather than doing a piece of paperwork that is not necessary. All right, then we also have requiring schools to teach mental health. This was a provision that came from students first, and it has a direct impact on their lives. They have been saying, this is an issue for us. We need our schools to help teach us about mental health. We need to know about addictions. We need to know about how to recognize symptoms in ourselves and to others. And if our schools aren't teaching this, then they are letting us down. And we are saying, yes, schools, now this is not next year, it's 3 years from now, schools must teach about mental health. And then they also need to give space to work it out so that they can give space for students that are getting therapy or getting help from a provider, that they can do it during the school day. So thank you, Representative Norris, for bringing that forward. It was your constituent that solved the problem for herself, but she didn't want to see the same, have other students have to go through the same thing. Direct impact on students' lives. Okay, this one does not have a direct impact necessarily, but yes, we are giving districts in the state the flexibility of a 4-day school week. And if somebody wants to say that this bill is not bipartisan, can go talk to Representative Baker. And we brought it back from the Senate. And I'm going to say there was some discussion. Maybe they weren't going to take it, but I know we heard from districts that it's working. We wanted to make sure that we brought it back and passed it into law. This is probably may not have a big impact, but beginning in the 9th grade, we want to make school certain that students are on track for graduation. So there is a provision in that discussion that students are having with their parents that not only are you talking about failure of class and how it may impact, but that you also think about how that's going to impact a graduation rate. So we figured out that that was the best place to have that discussion. But again, to make sure beginning in the 9th grade that we have front and center, is the student on track for graduation? Thank you, Chair Joachim. Freedom of speech in our newspapers. Students need to learn about the boundaries, which is in this bill, of free speech, but they also need to learn how to express their opinion and know that if they put something forward, if they would stay within the boundaries of what should be protected speech and what's not protected speech, that they have a right to speak their opinion. And some of the opinions that could be expressed in these student newspapers across the state, I will find repulsive personally, but it's their right. It's their freedom of speech. And students need to start learning that and to take responsibility and to understand what the boundaries are. So we have the freedom of speech for students as part of this policy bill. And we do also have expanding of post-secondary education options, and to make sure that students can take advantage of that when it's appropriate for them. So those are just some of the things that we are actually voting on today, and it's in this bill, and I do ask for a green vote.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Pawlowski.
Pawlowski, aye.
Pawlowski, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 68 yeas and 59 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference, and its title agreed to.